Now that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has become Health and Human Services Secretary, the Trump administration is calling for a report assessing the prevalence of several drugs, including stimulants like Adderall, that treat attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. But there are other tools out there that can set your brain up for success. Let's welcome Merrick Steffes, LPCA with Kinship Holistic Therapy. Thanks so much for being here.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I was astounded to learn that some 22 million Americans are diagnosed with ADHD. And I think sometimes we wonder, well, do we all have a little ADHD from time to time? What is the distinction between thinking you have something like it versus an actual diagnosable situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with social media, a lot of the times people see things, especially revolving mental health, and they think, oh, that's me, right?
Yeah.
But there is a difference between your everyday difficulty with attention and then an actual ADHD diagnosis. That largely exists in the realm of continued difficulty with impulsivity, emotional dysregulation, even just mental focus, difficulty with attention, initiating tasks, right? That executive function part of your brain.
So if I were to say I'm just a procrastinator by nature, doesn't necessarily mean I have ADHD.
Correct. But also, you know, if there is some significant distress, it might be worth getting it checked out.
Yeah, right. That is true. And what are your thoughts? Obviously, when certain symptoms are severe enough, that's where medication can be very, very helpful. And the reason why you're here is to talk about some of the other tools that we have in our toolbox, or that we can learn to put in our toolbox, that we can treat ADHD to become higher functioning members of society. You know, seeing that 15% of kids are on Adderall is a little bit alarming to someone who doesn't have much experience with it.
Right.
Does that seem rather high? Is that necessary?
In terms of if it's necessary or not, it really does depend on each individual and what works for them. I know there are some people who feel that medicine really works for them, and then for other people the side effects are too much. But regardless of if you're medicated for ADHD, if you're on a stimulant, if you're on some other type of drug, right, these holistic practices are really helpful across the board.
Let's dive into some of those. So a patient comes to you with the diagnosed ADHD. How would you then treat them if you weren't going to go down the prescription route?
Yeah, absolutely. I would really want to look at their lifestyle. What does your sleep look like? What does your diet look like? What does your exercise look like, right? Understanding that ADHD doesn't mean that someone is less motivated. It means that they have a lack of dopamine in their brain, right? And so increasing your body's natural resource, helping your body produce that neurotransmitter, is really going to help with all of those symptoms.
And what would be a natural way of, like you mentioned food, for instance, what your diet is like, so to increase dopamine, what would you consume to increase your dopamine levels?
Totally. A diet high in protein. Protein has some specific amino acids that are the precursors to dopamine formation in the brain. And then also really limiting a high processed food diet, because that just creates glucose spikes and it creates really unsteady energy to the brain. So really sticking to like those outer aisles of the grocery stores with whole foods really creates a steady source of energy to the brain, increasing B12, which is in protein, vitamin C, folic acid. All of these things help, if it's not modulating dopamine, create dopamine, sustain dopamine, those types of things.
That is really interesting, because we are a society that consumes so much processed food. So it's really no wonder that we have 22 million Americans and counting that are being diagnosed with ADHD. And what about practices that you can implement in your everyday life? So not just what you ingest, but how about ways to, I don't know if you want to say trick your brain, but build new muscles within the brain?
Totally. Exercise. And exercise really helps with that neuroplasticity, building those new neural pathways in your brain. It also helps with impulsivity, difficulty with impulsivity, it helps with mental resistance, it helps grow all of those muscles, but even on top of that, creating structure within your day so that your brain has a natural rhythm to expect. It really reduces decision fatigue and makes things feel easier, right, to start, even if you have that lack of dopamine.
Oh, could I just ask one more question? So someone who may have diagnosed ADHD or on, say, Adderall or a like drug, but want to get off of it and are transitioning into a more holistic practice, is that transition difficult? Is it possible?
Yes and no. It's absolutely possible,
Okay.
but it also depends on the person, right? And so just coming off of any kind of drug, you're going to have side effects. You're going to want to talk to your doctor about it. You're going to want to make sure that you never quit anything cold turkey, right? That you're doing it under supervision, but it's absolutely doable.
And to contact kinship.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Merrick. Really fascinating conversation. Appreciate your time.
Yeah.
We're back in 2 minutes.